see your tickets, please? Enjoy the movie.
This happened during the December school holiday. My friends and I went out to Orchard for fun. We started out in Cineleisure, playing pool. My friends suggested to go for a midnight show, and the rest said okay. We started looking to see which cinema was showing a midnight horror movie. We found out that JE Entertainment was showing one, so immediately we all rushed down. Together with me, there were another 8 of my friends. As we purchased the tickets, we requested to sit in a whole row. The ticket seller sold us the second last row of seats. I have no idea whether it was a coincidence or not, because I took a head count before the show started, and there were a total of 13 people in the cinema. As you all know, 13 is an unlucky number. During the show, I occasionally took a peek at the seats. I noticed that there were more than 13 people in the cinema. But the problem is that during the whole show, there were no other people coming in at all, which means that other than the 13 originally, we had company. Furthermore, when the movie reached about halfway, my friends and I heard noises coming from the last row of seats, which supposedly was empty. The noise was like the old cinema, where people came around checking the tickets and people eating. So I turned back to take a look. The whole row was empty. So where did the noise come from? Nobody knew. I confirmed that it was not from any of my friends, the reason being that none of us brought any food to eat. As soon as the show finished, we rushed out and went home. Since then, I never went back there to catch a midnight show again.
Last Thursday, I went to watch a horror movie with my friends. It was a midnight show, and the title of the show was 303. The show was already starting when we came in. We were late for about 10 minutes. And the story was about a college where there have been a murder in the school. There's 5 junior college boys, and after knowing that somebody has been killed, we felt so scared. It was such a thrilling show. We had shivers down our spine, and this show lasted for 2.5 hours. It ended at about 2:35 a.m. After the show ended, we decided to go to the toilet. It was quite dark at that moment, so the only persons left in the toilet was me and my friend. But then, we started to hear something weird. We heard a lady laughing and crying all at the same time. We hugged each other. We tried to open the door, but it was locked. We tried shouting for help, and while we were there, we constantly heard the voice. About 5 minutes later, the voice suddenly stopped and the door opened. We dashed out from the toilet, and we are so lucky that nothing terrible happened.
On the 7th floor of Plaza, Singapore, there used to stand a gynecological and pediatric clinic. Abortions used to take place there, and hence, when the haunting news came out that the GV cinema that actually stood there today, immediately readers put a connection on it. According to patrons, there is a little girl sitting somewhere near the front rows at halls 7 and 10 during the first or last show, when there are fewer people. Staff working there apparently needed to find the toys they might have placed at the door the previous night. Even taller tales have it that priests have been engaged in performing rituals in the hall. Projectionists working alone at night had purportedly seen shadows in the cinema after all patrons had left. Lifestyle of Straits Times did an interview with its senior manager, and they had refuted the claim. I think for economic reasons, it would be silly to admit it, even if the place was indeed haunted. What do you think?
There was one haunted cinema building many years ago. It was situated at Jalan Tengkera, Malacca. The haunting started as soon as the building was completed and started its operations, and the whole town knew about it. Their cinema has 2 levels, the lower level and the upper level. On the upper level, there are 2 seats draped with red cloth, and these are the haunted seats. Many people who sat on these seats experienced scratches on their bodies. Some even come out of the cinema bloodied. There were scratches on the faces, necks, and the bodies. It was truly a horrifying sight. There were occasions when people met a long-haired female ghost in the men's room and the toilet lights turning on and off by themselves. Seeing that the stories of the cinema haunting had spread all over the town, a medium was called to pacify the ghost. He performed his rituals and offered some animal blood and draped red cloth under 2 haunted seats, and those seats were never to be seated again. However, with the advent of VCD and DVD, the cinema went under and was demolished to make way for a new building.
Cinemas are rumored to be haunted because of the fact that it is a transitional place, the same as toilets, corridors, and storerooms, places where people don't spend a lot of time. Of course, another criteria is that it must be dark enough for spirits to lurk comfortably away from the sun. The cinema is dark for perhaps 80% of the time when the lights would be off, as movies were being screened. The following story I'm going to relate to you happened to me about 10 years ago at the famous Shaw Tower Cinema. At the time, I was doing a 933 movie marathon because it was having a good promotion. So I joined my friends even though I was extremely tired. It was almost 3 a.m. when I went to the ladies' room alone. I assumed I was the only one in the toilet because I had seen that all doors of the cubicles were not shut. After doing my business, I was looking at the mirror, and suddenly I heard the sound of a woman sighing. I then looked around to confirm the entire toilet is empty, and I quickly walked out of the toilet. After sitting down for 5 minutes, my friend went to the toilet, and she came back too. I then told her I had something to tell her, but I would tell her after the show finished. And she said, I also have something to tell you. So both of us quickly went out and exchanged the stories, and we were telling each other the exact same incident about hearing something and feeling uneasy in the toilet.
This story may sound a bit silly, a bit lame even, but I swear it's true. My friends and I had decided to watch a movie at the mall. The movie was Pontianak Harum Sundal Malama. It's quite a new movie. Maybe you've heard of it? Anyway, the mall. Yes, that's the name of the shopping complex. Very creative, right? Well, it's built right in the middle of a busy commercial district, the town center you might call it. It's brand new and just completed this year. As far as I know, no supernatural going-ons have happened in the area. Anyway, as I was saying, we were watching the Pontianak movie, the late night showing. I happened to be at the end furthest from the aisle, and the few seats from mine to the wall were all empty. In the middle of watching the movie, my neck felt kinda stiff. You know how that feels, right? After staring up at the movie for quite a while. So, I stretched out, turning my neck from side to side to get rid of the stiffness. A but to my shock, the empty seats beside me were no longer empty. There was a lady in a white dress with long black hair sitting there, seemingly absorbed in the movie. I turned back to the movie, frozen in terror. But I couldn't stand it anymore, and I was about to go crying to my friend, who was sitting right beside me, but didn't seem to have seen anything strange. I glanced back at the extra person, but she was gone. I went crying to my friend anyway. She didn't believe me, but she didn't mind switching seats with me. Needless to say, I wasn't very much interested in watching the movie after that. I mean, who needs a movie when you've seen the real thing?
About 30 years ago, I spent several years working in movie theaters in Worcester, Massachusetts. My favorite was the huge old building that had been chopped up into 4 separate cinemas. It had been a beautiful theater back when it was built in 1926 as the Poly Palace. Although it had been semi-destroyed during modernization in the late 50s, there were still many original features of the building that remained. As a manager, I'd been issued a big keychain which gave me access to the entirety of the building, and I spent countless hours exploring nearly every part of that building, except the curtain loft, which would have required climbing up an iron ladder about 80 feet. The building had attics and basements and crawl spaces. There was an area in the front of the building on the 2nd floor that had 2 or 3 abandoned businesses that had been walled off. There was a music store and a ballet studio, and maybe an office. There was also a bathroom. Everything looked like it was from the 1940s or 50s. Faded wallpaper with ballerina motif, a peeling mirror on the wall. In another section of the building was the old manager's office, with high ceilings and crown molding, and a beautiful stained glass window that, I believe, dated back to 1912, and had previously been part of an adjacent theatre. There was still an old safe in that office. I found a newspaper article in the public library from 1942 or 44 that detailed an armed robbery where 2 men had tied up the managers in the office and robbed the safe. One of those men was later executed in an electric chair for an unrelated crime. We used the old manager's office to store giant 30-gallon bags of popcorn. There was a sort of crawl space under the box office that was accessible by lifting a hinged plywood panel and climbing over a 4-foot wall. On the other side were the remains of a couple of basement rooms with broken concrete and bricks strewn about. In one of those rooms, I found an old flared Coca-Cola glass in perfect condition. I kept it for years. I also found a deck of cards in a handmade leather pouch with a snap closure fashioned out of a buffalo nickel. There were also old dressing rooms with makeup mirrors and light bulbs. The paint was peeling off the walls in potato-sized flakes. As you can surmise, the building was purported to be haunted. The head manager claimed to have had ghostly experiences. I'll start there, I guess. When the building was remodeled in the late 1950s, the men's room in the basement was converted into the manager's office. One night while closing up, the manager, my boss, made his way up the stairs to the main lobby. As he emerged, something caught his eye. Way up by the ornate 30-foot ceiling, he saw an apparition floating there. It disappeared into the ceiling. Terrified, he ran back down the stairs and hid in the office until daylight. Another time, he was again working late. There were several arcade machines in an area of the lobby, and they were normally powered off when the last shows were in. As he climbed the stairs, he heard all of the machines making their electronic bleeps and bloops. He was annoyed that the usher had failed to turn off the machines before punching out, and realized that he'd have to go turn them off himself. As soon as he opened the door, the noises stopped dead. Looking across the lobby to where he emerged, the machines were all dark. They were indeed powered off. The projectionist claimed that he looked out of his booth window one night in the big theater upstairs while shutting things down and saw a face looking in at him. I take those stories with a grain of salt, I was always skeptical of those based on the sources. Now, here's my experience. I was obsessed with the history of the building and would research newspaper archives for articles about it. There were rumors that a stagehand had died there in an accident during the time that it had been a vaudeville theater. I was never able to confirm that. I had talked about the building to my mother, and she in turn happened to discuss it with a woman that she worked with. That woman claimed to be psychic or clairvoyant, or maybe just that she would get feelings about things. She told my mother that she had been to that theater and that she felt someone had indeed been killed there, and that his name began with the letter M. My reaction was, okay, sure, she sounds nutty. Sometime later, I was the sole manager on duty on a slow night midweek. I was alone in the office in the basement. The 7 o'clock shows were in, and I was doing paperwork. The intercom buzzed. It was the box office cashier, calling to tell me that I had a phone call. I asked who it was, and she said that she didn't know. I hung up the intercom and pushed the button for the main incoming line where the call was holding. The earpiece erupted with loud, close squealing and static. I used the word close because it was so loud and distinct that I assumed that it was something wrong with the phone PBX in our building rather than the line itself or the caller's phone. It was just the impression that I had. "Hello?" I said. Nothing, just more squealing and static. "Hello?" I repeated. "Hello?" A man's voice, calm, flat, distinct. Then nothing further. Who is this? I was a bit perplexed. All of the noise on the line and the caller seemingly reluctant to speak. "This is Mike." Calm, quiet, not shouting over the noise on the line. Quite audible and clear. Then nothing but the awful squealing and static. I waited a few seconds for the caller to continue. After all, he called me. Presumably, there was a reason. Nothing. "Mike who?" I said, feeling a little impatient. Mike is a common name, and there were 2 Mikes employed there at the time. One of them had a fairly high-pitched voice that sounded nothing like the caller. It didn't sound like the other Mike either. The line abruptly went dead. Silent. The squealing and hissing stopped. I waited. No one called back. I called Sandy, the box office cashier, and asked her if they asked for me personally or just to speak with the manager. She said that the caller had asked for me by name. Suddenly I remembered my mother's friend, a man's name beginning with the letter M, Mike. It never happened again, and the phone never made those noises. No one ever confessed to a prank. I never figured out who it was.
This is one of the old cinemas in Singapore. It's still standing there, and I used to work there as a projectionist, and this was related to me by one of the long services colleague of mine. There was a movie playing during the 80s, some sort of Chinese ghost story, The Haunted Towers, and one of the staff decided to play a prank on my colleague. He dressed up in a Pontianak outfit and went to the auditorium. Normally after the show, they need to clean the place and clear the rubbish, and my colleague was sweeping between the seats. But suddenly, this guy jumped on my colleague and scared the shit out of him. My colleague was of course pissed, and the following week, the same show was showing again. My colleague was on duty again, and this time after the show while sweeping, he thought that he saw the guy dress up as the lady walking past the auditorium entrance. Thinking that he wanted to give a piece of his mind for what he did last week, he chased after him. He called his name and started to scold him for what he did the previous week. But suddenly, the lady stopped between the staircase, separating the stall and the circle seats. My colleague continuously verbalized the lady with colorful language, and then the lady turned. But when he looked, it was not the guy that scared him last week. Only then did my colleague realize that the lady had no legs, and the face Well, he froze to that spot till he passed out. He was on leave for a few days, and the best part is that the person that scared him the first time was on leave when it happened.
Back when I was 17, I applied for a job in a spanking new cinema that was new to my city. There was a lot of hype about it as it was a well-known brand and known for being in the upper league of cinemas. I popped along to the interview and to my surprise got a job as a cinema host. My duties involved serving guests, selling tickets, cleaning screens and toilets, basically a bit of everything. I'm a movie nerd. I couldn't wait to start. This cinema was part of a massive regeneration of the city and was welcomed by the whole country for creating job opportunities. Now, where this new complex and shopping mall was built had a bit of history to it. Way back in the day, this plot of land is where public hangings used to happen for convicted thieves and convicts. Some as young as 9 and 10 years old. In fact, it wasn't until the late 90s or early 2000s that the hanging location was permanently removed and replaced with some modern metal structure. When I say the location was removed, it was a kind of circular platform that was locally called the bandstand. After the bodies were hanged, according to history, they were then wheeled a short walk away and dumped. This is what the cinema and shopping complex was built over. Now you know a little about it, let's move on to the happenings within the cinema, as that's what you're here for. In each cinema screen there was a night vision CCTV installed. It was useful for the ushers spotting teens misbehaving mainly. The cleaners used to be the first ones in the building each morning before our cinema staff would come in. One morning I came in for my shift and a few of the cleaners were sitting around the confectionery tables, trying to calm one of the female cleaners down. She seemed really upset about something, and I assumed perhaps a death in the family. I didn't want to intrude, so went to start opening up the popcorn bins, etc. This is when I overheard one of them say to the other something along the lines of, "She isn't lying, she's telling the truth. I've seen it too." This woman was deeply shaken. I mean, she looked like she had just seen a ghost, as humans would put it. Little did I know, she literally did. Long story short, it all came out that this cleaner had witnessed a ghost in the biggest of the 12 screens. She claims she was cleaning the stairs when she looked up and saw a man sitting in one of the chairs, but she knew he wasn't real. As her story goes, she quickly fled the screen and ran down to the other cleaners crying. I don't blame her. Myself and another staff member thought it would be a good idea to rewind the CCTV from this screen and see if we could see anything odd. As we did, we watched her clean the steps with a brush and pan. And then you could see her slightly look up at the middle seats, freeze fixated on something for about 5 seconds, then drop her brush and run out of the screen. What was incredible to see on the CCTV was a sort of mist in the area she was staring at. Me being me, put it down to dust, maybe a glitch in the screen spotlights. But this domestic cleaner was certain there was a man sitting in the screen by himself. The story quickly spread around the cinema to the point our management pulled us all in and told us we needed to stop talking about it, and that what happened was a trick of the eye. We didn't dare tell our manager we checked the CCTV, as we knew it's not to be used for nosy purposes. Little stories here and there would casually pop up from time to time. The next one was one of the male staff members who worked up in the projection room came running down into the confectionery area one evening and swore someone pushed deeply into his back when he was setting up a reel. He was badly shaken and quite the macho man who used to laugh at us for getting scared of being in certain screens by ourselves. He was in the projection room by himself, so there was no explanation for what he felt. I recall seeing management bring him into the office, and around 20 minutes later he left and didn't come back to finish his shift. A few days after that, we were told he wouldn't be working projection anymore, and instead would become an usher. We were shocked, as the pay was a lot less, but that's what he did. Someone asked him what on earth happened, and he point blank refused to talk about it. Rumor has it that his back was bruised from this firm push, but I can't confirm nor deny that, as I never seen it. The cinema was so bright and flashy. When it was bustling with the guests, it never had a negative vibe. Or maybe we were all just too busy to notice it. However, the staff-only areas had a different feeling to them, and when the guests would leave, the entire place had a different impact on you. It would feel cold, and you ever get that feeling someone could jump out at you at any point, so you're always kinda on edge? That. I would get goosebumps in areas that weren't cold, shivers in screens as if someone was brushing past me, when I would be standing in them to make sure no one was fooling about. I just keep playing it off as other possibilities, which is what I'm good at doing. One night, I was closing with around 7 other team members. I was team leader at this point, hence it being my responsibility to close up. It was around 12 a.m, and I gathered the staff outside of the doors while I was locking the main doors. Just as I was about to do so, we all heard the loud creaking of one of the public bathroom doors open. The creak was long, as if someone was slowly pushing it open. The creaking sound was well known to us, as you'd constantly hear them open and close with guests using them and kids slamming them. Another team member and I dropped our bags and headed into the ladies' bathroom to check it out, assuming a guest had been left behind unwell or there was kids messing about. However, our protocol was to check each screen and public area before confirming with management the cinema was clear. But then again, mistakes can happen. We were heading into the ladies' bathroom, and each of the loo doors was closed, apart from the disabled, a larger one at the very end. It was wide open. I called out hello, but nothing. We both walked down and peered into the cubicle, and there was no one. Confused and freaked out, I decided to call the mall security to check the place for us. Along came 3 security men, and they checked everywhere. But nothing. No one. All our staff-only doors were coded, so no one could run out of them if they were messing about. The door that was wide open wasn't loose. In fact, it was stiff as hell. There were no drafts. Basically no reason for it to give out this long, chilling creak. We closed up and laughed it off as we went our separate ways. But that particular chill stuck with me each time I'd be in them toilets. You could explain this one as just poor lighting or electric works, but when it happened to you, it was truly awful. When we would load up the trolleys to take the rubbish out, you would bring the trolley down to the basement and out to the loading bay. As you were underground at this point, there were no windows. The long basement corridors had them censored lights that would make clicking sound as they turned on, detecting your motion and movement. One evening, myself and my colleague were taking a trolley down each and exited the lift. The lights came on, click, 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 as we walked along. We were chatting about something or another, and the next minute, click, click, click. The lights went out. It was pitch blackness to the point I couldn't even see my colleague. Our work radios that were attached to our belts started giving off the worst feedback sound, so we immediately turned them off. My colleague grabbed my arm, and we both just stood there. I recall rattling the metal trolley to try to get the lights to detect movement, but nothing. I asked her if she had her mobile on her to use as a torch, but she didn't, as we weren't supposed to carry them on us, and mine was in the office on charge. We agreed if this was an electric outage, we should feel the walls to get back to the lift and back upstairs. Now, looking back on the situation, we must have looked like idiots, but we held on to each other and felt the walls back to the lift. Remember, we honestly couldn't see a damn thing. We were in a concrete tunnel with zero light source. We could only see the dim light of the elevator button. We pressed it, and as soon as we did, click, 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 all the lights came back on. We left the trolleys there and went up and explained what happened. According to mall security, they had no knowledge of an issue with the lights in the basement. Yes, maybe it was just a dodgy coincidence, but it was terrifying. Thank God I had my friend with me, as I think if I had been alone, I would have passed out. Another time I was in the storeroom, sorting through a big delivery early in the morning, around 7 a.m. I was the only cinema employee at the time. Apart from my manager, who was in the office, he was male. My work radio buzzed and a somewhat young female said, "Can you come to the basement?" It was a voice I didn't recognize, and it was clear as day. The voice said it in a playful way. I stopped in my tracks and headed back to the office, thinking along the way maybe my manager had his kid in. I walked into him, and he looked up at me as if to say, "You good?" I asked him, did he have anyone in the building with him that may have a radio? He didn't. He had a radio on his desk beside his coffee, and all the other radios were on the charging stations. I explained to him someone asked me on my radio to come to the basement, and in our shock, we just laughed. What else do you do? You go to the basement, of course. We headed to the basement and no one. We were both totally spooked, and at that point I honestly questioned my sanity, as I know, still to this day, what I heard. Other stories from employees I heard, but never witnessed. Staff members seeing shadows in the sections behind the screens, hearing voices next to them when there was nobody there, unsettling feelings when doing fire checks along the fire escape routes, and access codes on doors buzzing to say a code was input wrong, even though no one was trying to use them. Another messed up story from a girl I worked with and that I'm still close to. She was on usher duty one day, and a man came out of a screen during a film to tell her that there was a man seated behind him and his wife who kept kicking their chair and whispering. My friend apologized and went in and up the stairs to tell the man to stop. But there was no one there, and no allocated seat purchased for that location. Her and the man assumed he had snuck out. But while checking the CCTV, you can see the annoyed man turn around several times, assuming to tell this man to stop. But on the CCTV, there was no one. Was the aggravated man crazy, or did he really see the ghost of a man sit there? I have no idea. So there you go, that's my experience of working in a cinema built on top of a burial ground for the hanged criminals and thieves of years gone by. I enjoyed my time there, but you couldn't pay me to head back into the basement or screen 12 alone. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.